Hey guys, so I'm going to try to do the second video. It's been a little while since I did the first video, so I'm going to try to get the second one done. Just had a lot going on, so I'm going to get these videos done whenever I have a chance. So anyway, this is going to be the second video based on this book right here. It's called Joshua, the Life of the Messiah, from a Messianic Jewish perspective. So some of the material that I'm covering today comes from this book. So this has been an interest of mine, just how that we as Christians it happens to be 2024, don't understand a lot of the first century Jewish perspective, and we don't understand a lot of how the New Testament is a fulfillment of the Old Testament. I found in my own life that my understanding of the Old Testament and my understanding of how the New Testament, basically the verses that we find in the Old Testament typically have an Old Testament reference. And if we're not understanding those Old Testament references, when we read verses in the New Testament, it's very likely that we aren't truly understanding the context and the meaning of the words in the New Testament. So that's been an interest of mine. This book has been a great help. So just as a reminder, this book was written by a man by the name of Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum. He grew up in a Jewish household and later converted to Christianity. He has numerous college high-level research type degrees in this particular subject. So that's kind of where I'm getting some of my information from. This book is the abridged version. There is a 4-volume work of this same book that has all of the research information in it. This book is more just the findings of what he found based on all of his research, but all of his research material is documented and can be found in that 4-volume work. So there's that. Just to kind of recap a little bit, theology and doctrine are a big interest of mine. I feel like the more that we know about God, the more we know of God, the more about God that we have to love. How can we know a God how can we love a God that we don't truly know? So that's kind of where the name Titus 2 Bible Study came in. Paul is instructing Titus to be about sound doctrine. And again, how can we understand sound doctrine? How can we live by sound doctrine if we don't know the God that we claim to love? And the way that we know him, a big part of that, of course, is in his word. And not only his word, not only the Bible, but the Bible in context. The Bible in the context that the original writers meant for it to be understood. So that's a big part of my heart. That's a big part of what I want to be my Christian walk, is to understand the Bible in the context that the original writers meant for me to understand. So I have cats. I have 4 cats, and they seem to be scurrying down here. So if you hear noises, it's probably cats. Also, I just want to point out that I am part of a local body, a local church. This study is my own. This is not reflective of my church. This isn't reflective of something that we're studying at church. this in no way should reflect my church. This is the product of my own Bible study. Also, I want to point out I'm in no way trying, excuse me, to be a preacher. This is just my own musings, my own, I'm studying the Bible. These things are interesting to me, so I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts. But as a woman, I submit to my husband. I submit to my local church body. And if there's ever a situation where I need to be corrected, those are the avenues that I would submit to for correction. Okay, so with all that covered, so the last time I did a video, I talked about Messianic miracles. And the last time I talked about Jesus cleansing a Jewish leper. So we're talking about Messianic miracles. Well, what are Messianic miracles? So speaking of cat, so Jesus performed two types of miracles during his earthly ministry. He performed miracles that any human empowered by the Holy Spirit would be able to perform. There are Old Testament men such as Moses, Elijah, Elisha. These men performed miracles. Miracles in Jewish history are there. Jesus was not the first person to ever show up on earth performing miracles. I hope my cat is not distracting anybody. But there's also miracles where there were no other documented cases of those miracles occurring before the Messiah came to earth. And even the Jewish leaders of the time, they believed before Jesus came to earth that only the Messiah would be able to perform these miracles. As a matter of fact, they stated that they would know when the Messiah arrived, when he showed up, because he would be able to do certain miracles that no other person before him had ever been able to do. So cleansing a Jewish leper after the law of Moses was complete was part or one of those type or such miracles. So just to cover again, Pharisaical Judaism, that was the primary form of Judaism from approximately 500 BC up until the Second Temple was destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. So the time frame that we're looking at here, when Jesus came to earth, Pharisaical Judaism would have been the primary form of Judaism at that time. Let me turn my page here. So again, just some Jewish context. And again, I covered this all in my last video. So certainly go back and watch that if you want more explanation, more in-depth study about this certain things. However, again, the Jewish leaders believed that only the Messiah would be able to do certain types of miracles when he showed up on earth. A lot of this was detailed and documented in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in, let me see, it was between 1947 and 1956. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the second Messianic miracle. So the first Messianic miracle was Jesus cleansing the Jewish leper after the law of Moses had been completed. So between the time of the law of Moses being completed and the time that Jesus began his earthly ministry, no Jewish leper had ever been cleansed or healed of leprosy. So that was the first Messianic miracle. The second Messianic miracle is the casting out of a dumb or a mute demon. So I'm going to read, so there is numerous Bible verses that address this, and I'm going to read all of them. So 2 of them come from Matthew. First is Matthew 9:32 and 33. And it says, as they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him, being Jesus. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. There's also a very similar account in Matthew 12. Some scholars say that this is the same story, that Matthew 9 and Matthew 12 is the same account. It's the same story. It's the same person. Other scholars believe that this is 2 different accounts, but the stories are very, very similar. So Matthew 12, 22 through 23 and 27 state, then a demon-oppressed man who was blind and mute was brought to him, being Jesus, and he healed them so that the man spoke and saw. So in this account, the man was both blind and mute. It says, and all the people were amazed and said, can this be the son of David? And basically, Jesus goes on to say, so the Pharisees accused Jesus of being possessed by Beelzebub. And I'll get into that in a later video. Most people know that as the unpardonable sin, but I'll get into that later. I feel like that's another account that is largely misunderstood, especially when you look at it in a Messianic Jewish perspective. But Jesus goes on to say, by whom do your sons cast them out? And I'll get into this more later, but basically he's asking the Pharisees a very, very important question after this account where the blind and mute man both saw and spoke, and the demon was cast out of him. Mark 11:14 and 19 says, now he, being Jesus, was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, the mute man spoke, and the people marveled. And again, Jesus addresses the Pharisees and says, by whom do your sons cast them out? Last one, Luke 14:14. Now he, being Jesus, was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, the mute man spoke, and the people marveled. So first of all, let's establish here, most Bible translations state that Jesus cast out a dumb demon. What this means, of course, is that the man who was possessed by this demon, by this devil, did not have the ability to speak. He was mute. And so when Jesus cast this demon out, this person who lacked the ability to speak was now able to speak. So I want to cover a little bit about the history of casting out demons. Jesus was not the first person to state or to go through any kind of process of casting out a demon. Many extra biblical documents, and again, I believe 100% that the only infallible, the only perfect record is the Bible. It is infallible. Nothing else is infallible. However, like I said in the last video, I think that we can use extra biblical documents in order to gain some perspective or some history that we may not understand otherwise. So we're using it as a reference, but we are in no way saying that that these documents are infallible. So anyway, many extra biblical documents and historians recount that Pharisees rabbis, priests, and other Jewish religious figures have shown the ability to cast out demons. Like I said before, Jesus was not the first person to cast out a demon. Jesus did not expect Jewish people or the religious leaders of that time to believe his claim that he was the Messiah simply based on his ability to cast out demons alone. In the Gospels, Jesus asked the Pharisees, "By whom do your sons cast them out?" So what that is showing is that Jesus is acknowledging that the Pharisees and the religious leaders and people associated with the Pharisees have cast out demons before. So basically Jesus is showing that this has happened before. So what I want to state here is that so when Jesus says, "By whom do your sons cast them out?" In this case, sons here refers to the disciples or the students of the Pharisees. Sons would refer to others who believe in Pharisaical Judaism and who follow Pharisaical Judaism. Just of note, the account of the sons of Sceva in Acts 19:13 is an interesting follow-up to this whole story. So just for some extra reading. All right, let me get my page turned here. All right, so in all previous accounts, so in all written stories, accounts by historians, by history books, in all accounts of demon exorcism, there was the use of spells or spices or roots or specific words, gestures, instruments. For example, sometimes they would use like candles and in one of those candle holders, and they would use the smoke, and they would use certain incantations, basins of water. Sometimes they would use Old Testament scripture, or they would use something that was supposedly belonged to an Old Testament figure, Solomon, for example. Or they would use just other types of primitive rituals. One account that I pulled up and read told a story of the exorcist pulling a demon out of someone's nostril with a ring, with a certain ring that supposedly had some type of ability to cause the demon to be afraid enough to come out. And then, like I said, in the story, the demon came out of his nose. But one thing we have to note is that in every single case, the person doing the exorcism, the exorcist, was relying on a power source from an outside source. It was never something internal. It was always something. They were using something to allow them to make contact with this demon or cause this demon to be afraid enough to come out of the person. There was some kind of ritual. So specifically talking about casting out demons under or within Pharisaical Judaism. So again, this comes from this book, from his research into first century, give or take, a small period of time. Basically within Pharisaical Judaism, there was a certain ritual that they used to cast out demons. So this was done in 3 stages. First, the exorcist would establish communication, and by that I mean verbal communication with the demon. So the person that they were casting the demon out of had to be able to speak, because it was a belief in their belief system. They believed that the demon used the vocal cords of the person that was demon possessed. So second, the exorcist would ask the demon its name. Once the person, the religious leader, whoever that might have been, whatever role they might have been in, for example, if it was a priest or a rabbi or a Pharisee, etc. Once that person knew its name, they could use that demon's name to cast that demon out. So it says third, the exorcist would cast the demon out using its name. So that was the specific ritual under Pharisaical Judaism. And again, at 3 stages. So there is an example in the Gospels where Jesus does use this particular ritual. This comes from Mark 5, and it demonstrates the Jewish methodology. So in Mark 5:9, it states, and Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" So he's speaking to the demon-possessed man. He's attempting to make contact with the demon. And the demon goes on and replies, he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged Jesus earnestly not to send them, because they were many, out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on a hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank and into the sea and drowned in the sea. So again, this is an example of Jesus using the same methodology, the same ritual as the Pharisees and the religious leaders of that time used in order to cast out demons. But as we're going to see, as we read further into the Gospels, Jesus cast out demons much differently. He had abilities that the religious leaders, the Jewish religious leaders at that time did not have. In Matthew 9:33, it states, "When the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled. Never was anything like this seen in Israel." So what this is doing is this is showing that these Israelites had never seen this happen before. What they were used to seeing was the Pharisees' rituals in casting out demons. They had never seen it done the way that Jesus was doing it. Matthew 12:23, "And all the people were amazed and said, 'Can this be the son of David?'" So what was the Israelites' reaction to how Jesus was casting out these demons? They said, "Can this be the son of David?" In other words, can this be our Messiah? So I've got here, simply put, Jesus was different. Jesus was unique. The Jewish people who witnessed his miracles knew he was unique. And they began to ask very, very important questions. A very, very important question, can this man be our Messiah? So remember, going back to the last study that I gave, the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders right now, were in the middle of a law-mandated investigation process of Jesus. So they were watching him, they were examining him, and then they moved into the interrogation stage where they were asking him questions, and they asked him a lot of questions. They followed him around. But so Jesus shows that he is better. He is more powerful. He's more capable than the Jewish leaders of the day. Why? Because he was able to use the same methods of exorcism that Jewish religious leaders of that time was able to use, and he was simply able to verbally cast the demons out. Jesus shows that he was superior to the religious leaders because he could do both. He could use the same ritual that they were using, and then also he could just speak, and his very words would cast out the demons. Jesus didn't need any kind of rituals. He did not need an outside power source. We know that Jesus is God. Jesus was in the beginning as the Word. And as the Word, he was both with God and he was God. And that comes from John 1 in the Gospels. Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and that comes from Matthew 1:20. Jesus was baptized with the Holy Spirit, and we find this in Matthew 3:16 and 17. Jesus' miracles were performed by the Holy Spirit. His power source was internal. His power source was himself. Jesus was both fully man and fully God. And we find these concepts in John 10:30, John 1:14, and also Hebrews 4:15. I've also got a link to references that show many, many, many more verses that show that Jesus was both fully man and fully God. So to further this point, Matthew 8:16 states, "That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick." Jesus didn't need a ritual. His very words were able to cast out demons. Also, Mark 1:23 through 27 says, "And immediately there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, 'What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?'" So here again, we are seeing that the demon is using the vocal cords of the person that he is possessing. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, so the demon and the man that was possessed, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He verbally commands the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Never had Israel seen such a thing. No one had ever been able to just simply speak to the demon, and the demon would come out. So, moving on. Why is it so important that Jesus cast out a mute demon? So I've given a bunch of examples where Jesus just uses a word, pinpoint, that demon comes out. So what in the world does it matter that he casts out a mute or a dumb demon? Well, it matters a lot, because while he's able to cast out these other demons, before Jesus came to earth, just like with the Jewish leper, the Jewish leaders believed that a dumb demon could not be cast out. And the reason being goes back to the Jewish way, the Jewish ritual, that demons were cast out under Pharisaical Judaism. Because remember, there were 3 parts. They verbally made contact with the demon. They learned the demon's name. And then they used the demon's name to command or cast him out of that person. And the way they would make contact with the demon was the demon would use the vocal cords of the person who was possessed. Well, if that person couldn't talk, if that person did not have the ability or the capability to speak, there was no way to make contact with that demon. So the religious leaders believed that that demon couldn't be cast out, that that person was just unfortunately possessed and could not be free from this demon. So let's talk about the Messianic miracle and what Jesus did in casting out a mute demon. Okay, so Jesus had cast out demons with the use of rituals and other Jewish procedures. He had proven that a simple verbal command was enough to cast out demons. He carried the authority of his Father in heaven. However, Jesus would prove even further his claims that he was the Messiah. The Jewish leaders, and I've just talked about this, I'm just kind of reading through my notes, kind of recapping here. The Jewish leaders knew that in order for a demon to be cast out, the exorcist had to first make verbal contact with the demon. The exorcist had to know the demon's name. Therefore, it was their belief that this one kind of demon could not be cast out. Only the Messiah, when he came to earth, would possess the capability to be able to cast out a mute demon or a demon out of a mute person. So again, Jesus proves his messiahship by performing a miracle that is deemed impossible. Without making verbal contact with the demon and without gaining access to its name, Jesus cast the demon out of a man. And the physical proof that the man had been made whole after the demon was cast out was the man regained his ability to speak. Also, like I said, Matthew 9 and Matthew 12. In Matthew 9, it shows an account of a man who was mute. In Matthew 12, it goes through an account of a man who was mute and blind. So like I said, some scholars think that that's the same person. Other scholars believe that those are two different accounts. It doesn't matter. The point of the matter is Jesus is able to perform a miracle that is deemed impossible. The account of the man in Matthew 12, the physical proof that this man had the demon cast out of him was that he was blind and he gained his sight, and he was mute and he gained the ability to speak. So as you can see, the Jewish people over and over and over had recognized that what Jesus was doing was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Something was going on. Something different was happening when Jesus was around. Nobody had been able to do these before. However, on the heels of two very important messianic miracles, so on the heels of the Jewish leper being cleansed and a mute person with a demon being freed from that demon. So two very important, very specific messianic miracles had occurred, had happened directly in front of their face. They were undeniable miracles. And not only they were undeniable miracles, but they were undeniable in that this should not have been able to happen unless the person standing in front of them was the Messiah. By their own admission, before the Messiah ever even came to earth, they believed that only the Messiah would be able to do these things. And on the heels of these two extraordinary miracles, not to mention all the other extraordinary miracles that Jesus did, but on the heels of these two very unique, specific miracles, they yet again rejected Christ. So I've got here, on the heels of such an amazing miracle, the Jewish leaders again reject Jesus. They reject his messiahship. They reject his messianic claims. And the Jewish people just like they had always done, even back to the time of the kings of Israel. When the kings of Israel would follow God and do the right things, the Jewish people would follow right along after them. And when the kings would not follow God's commands, not follow the laws, do the wrong things, the Jewish people would follow right after them. It was the same thing with the Jewish people and the religious leaders of Israel. When the Jewish religious leaders messed up, the people followed right after them. It was history repeating itself over and over and over. The writer of this book, Dr. Fruchtenbaum, states that they had a leadership complex, and they really did. So it says the Jewish people would follow lockstep with their leaders, and they did, even after all these amazing things. After the second Messianic miracle had been performed, the nation of Israel had two choices. They could accept and declare that Jesus was who he claimed and proved himself to be, or they could find another way of explaining away the miracles of Jesus and how he was able to perform these miracles. The religious leaders, the religious people, could not deny that Jesus was doing miracles. They couldn't even deny that he was doing miracles that he should not have been able to do unless he was the Messiah, unless he was who he claimed to be. They could not deny his uniqueness. After all, they were in the middle of an investigation of Jesus that was mandated by Jewish law. So again, going back to my last lesson, when a person showed up and they started making claims of, hey, I'm the Messiah, or even if they never said anything, even just if the miracles themselves were messianic in nature, the Sanhedrin by law had to investigate. So Jesus would soon declare that the Jewish leaders and the people, the nation of Israel, that their rejection of Jesus was absolutely unpardonable. If you go back to Matthew 11, 20 and 24, Jesus states to them, basically, you have seen too much. They had seen the very Son of God. Jesus had done too much right in front of them. It says in Matthew 11, their punishment would be worse than Sodom, Tyre, and Sidon. So I'll go into this more in the next video that I do. But right after this happens, right after this rejection of Jesus and Jesus's messianic claims and Jesus's miracles, Jesus's ministry would soon change in a very, very, very noticeable way. Up until this point in time, Jesus had never spoken in parables to the Jewish people. His message had always been super, super clear. He was offering himself to the nation of Israel. He was showing himself in the clearest way possible that he was their Messiah. And soon, right after this happens, there's a change. There's a change in the way that Jesus approaches and offers himself to the Jewish people. So at this time, the nation of Israel had hardened their hearts. Jesus will soon pass judgment on what he describes as this generation. And again, I'll talk about all that next. he states to them, the only sign they will now receive is the sign of Jonah. So again, all of this is just kind of leading into the next video that I plan to make, and this will go into the into details of the unpardonable sin and the nation of Israel and what Israel did and what the Pharisees did and Jesus's reaction to them. But at this point, Jesus has performed 2 messianic miracles. There's one definite messianic miracle still to go that he performed in front of the Jewish people. The 4th messianic miracle would, of course, be raising his own self from the dead. So I'll go into those later. So yeah, that's all I've got for today. I hope this has blessed you, and I hope that this has helped you see these passages a little more clearly, with a little more context and a little more insight. I know it has for me. Thanks, guys. Bye.